Do you have any insight onto what causes cancer?
A mutation occurs, and that could be because of exposure to UV light, or it could be from exposure to carcinogens.
That's another massive
Huge
fear
one.
of mine,
Yeah.
that it seems to just be happening more and more and more and more.
Then that cell now has an advantage, and then it accumulates more mutations, and all of a sudden you have cancer.
Inflammation can cause
Yes.
cancer. Sugar can cause
Yeah.
cancer.
When I was dying from my Castleman disease, there was no data for sirolimus to save my life. I had lab data that made me think it might.
Are you looking at any preventatives specifically for cancer?
Yeah, so there's one of our programs. So we've got 6 active programs at every cure, so different drugs that we're repurposing for diseases. And one of them is around the numbing medicine lidocaine. So, when you go to the dentist, you get an injection of lidocaine, and the role that it can play in preventing recurrence of breast cancer. So actually, if you inject lidocaine around a breast cancer tumor, there's really compelling evidence from a big clinical trial that was done in India that you're going to reduce recurrence of breast cancer and also reduce mortality from breast cancer. Now, this is an example where it's not total prevention, because it's not like it's preventing the breast cancer in the first place, but it's preventing the breast cancer from coming back, which of course is so important because that's oftentimes what's so deadly about breast cancer. And it's an example where lidocaine is this like really cheap old substance where, unless a nonprofit like ours or another nonprofit comes in, the work's just not going to be done to push it forward. And so we're really optimistic about that. And we're actually also studying the role that lidocaine might play in other cancers as well.
Are you studying, or do you have any insight onto what causes cancer?
Yeah, so the breakthroughs over the last 10 or 15 years really indicate that cancer occurs when mutations occur in the genomes of those specific cells. And so they're called somatic mutations. It basically means like we're all born with our own genetic makeup, but within the cells, let's say in your pancreas, a mutation occurs. And that could be because of exposure to UV light, or it could be from exposure to carcinogens in the environment, what you eat. And those genetic changes, if they happen in a part of the genome that isn't that important, that cell just dies and you never even knew the mutation happened. But if that mutation happens to happen in a part of the genome that's important for, say, cells to replicate or maybe to grow blood vessels, then that cell now has an advantage, and then it accumulates more mutations, and all of a sudden you have cancer. And so it's sort of this random set of things that have to happen for you then to develop cancer. And of course, you can do things in your life to reduce your risk of cancer by, eating well and exercise and doing all the right stuff, because that's going to reduce the amount of those somatic mutations that occur to your cells. But it is sort of this very much random thing, which is tough, because that's why, sometimes young kids get horrible cancers, and it's also why you see cancers emerging in older years, because basically more of these mutations have occurred over the course of life.
I mean, is there anything to? I've heard a lot that inflammation can cause
Yes.
cancer, sugar can cause
Yeah.
cancer.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything to that?
Yeah, so the inflammation for sure, the more you proliferate, the more your cells are proliferating, which often occurs in the setting of inflammation, the more chances there are for genetic mistakes and basically mutations to occur because of the increased proliferation. So absolutely. Sugar, I think there's a lot of data that sugar plays a really important role in cancer development and progression. Like once it starts, I haven't seen as much on it, like sort of causing it to start in the first place. But it's also really hard to keep track of all the research because there's just like so much work being done.
And then, I've also heard that a lot of these diseases, and I might rattle a couple off that this is not true about, but cancer, Alzheimer's, a lot of these. I mean, I've read things and interviewed people that say none of these are actually organic diseases. They are potentially, a product of our filthy environment. Is there truth to that?
I think that our filthy environment contributes and probably increases risk and increase the numbers. I think all the conditions you mentioned have happened as long as we've been around. They're in textbooks from the 1700s,
Okay.
But they maybe weren't as common. And so one reason why they might not be as common, I think, is exactly what you said. There's things in our environment that are making them more common. The other is that we're thankfully living a lot longer. We're not dying from infections from bacteria, that's in our water, for example. So we're living longer, which means there's more opportunity for these other diseases to sort of emerge. So I think that my experience with a lot of these things is that I think that there is definitely a lot of truth and data backing up the idea that our environment is playing a really important role in increasing the number of these cancers and conditions. But oftentimes it's a lot more complicated than just like, it's just the environment, because, these things have been in textbooks for a lot longer than a lot of these chemicals have even been around.
In another thing, I mean, there's a lot of, ever since COVID, it's really caught fire after COVID. I mean, there's a lot of hesitation with vaccines.
Yes.
There's a lot of hesitation to pharmaceuticals.
Yep.
And there's this massive movement on I don't know, kind of holistic type medicine.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I think it could be, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know much in this sector, but I mean, it seems, my fear is that we demonize all of the progress that we've made with medicine due to conspiratorial claims. And so I'm just curious. I mean, I think there's got to be a healthy balance here. I mean,
there has to be. Yeah. I mean, my feeling is that we just want to help patients with the medicines that are available. And if it's from a holistic doctor, or if it's from sort of traditional Western medicine, or if it's from pharmaceutical companies, the drug that I'm on, sirolimus, it actually was discovered in the soil on the island of Rapa Nui in the Pacific. Like, it literally was discovered in the soil, and then a drug company figured out ways to manufacture it. And so, like, my drug is about as natural of a drug as you could ever take, but it's a pharmaceutical drug, and it's used for transplant rejection, and it destroys your immune system. And so we like to oftentimes think of things as very black and white. There's the natural stuff, and then there's the pharmaceutical stuff. Well, my pharmaceutical stuff was natural. We just figured out how to make the exact same thing over and over again. And so it's a lot grayer than I think that it's easy to wrap our heads around. And I think that we've just got to follow the data, and like, what are the drugs that can help people? And is there data to suggest that it can help people? If so, like, we should put people on them. And I think try to get less caught up on, is it from a drug company, or, what's the source of it? But I think just really just actually track, like, is there good data here? And to your point earlier, like, when I was dying from my Castleman disease, there was no data for sirolimus to save my life. I had lab data that made me think it might, but sometimes you do follow the things that don't have much data, because the alternative is that you're going to die, and you do that. But if you do have data on drugs, like, what sort of breaks my heart is when I hear about people with terminal cancer that say, I'm not going to take this medicine because it's a pharmaceutical product, I'm going to take something else. And then you hear about them passing away, and you just think to yourself, like, I wish they'd given themselves a shot with the traditional pharma stuff. And who knows if the pharma stuff would have worked, but we have a lot of data to show that it does work in some people. And we talked about earlier, 18% of people and 20% and 25%. And these things don't work in everyone, but if they work in you, and they could work in you, I really want to make sure that we try it in you, because, the work's been done to prove that it can help some people.
what about, I mean, what are some of the diseases that you are targeting nowadays? What are you going after? I mean, we had a brief discussion about Alzheimer's on the break here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another massive fear of mine, that it seems to just be happening more and more and more and more.
It's frightening.
And so, I mean,
yeah. So as we shared earlier, the sort of way that our AI platform works is we look across every drug and every disease and basically see what matches score the highest. And so we start from there. So we don't pick a disease a priori and say we're going to work on it. We let the algorithm point us towards a match. And then our team looks into it, and we spend lots of time reviewing through them. Our team has now reviewed over 6,000 of the top matches. It's out of 75 million, so we got a ways to go. But 6,000 like brilliant MDs, PhDs reviewing through them, looking for treatments that are hiding in plain sight. And out of the ones we've looked through, we currently have 6 active programs. We're actually just getting ready to add 3 more. So we'll have 9 active programs in the next month or so that look across conditions that I mentioned earlier. The example of breast cancer is one of them. That's one of the more common cancers. We've got another program in a condition called Bachmann-Bupp syndrome, where it's only been described in a about 20 kids ever, where kids are born with this horrible rare condition where they basically, they're hypotonic, which means their muscles don't work. So they're on feeding tubes and they're basically bedbound, and they would be bedbound their whole lives. But there's a drug called DFMO that's been around for a long time that wasn't made for this condition, and it actually is really effective. So the kids that have been started on DFMO early in life are standing up, sitting up. Some of them are even walking. The kids that are started later on in life, maybe they're feeding tubes out, but they're not quite at the same level they would have been if they were a typical child. Like, this is why we started this organization. It's like maybe only a couple dozen kids are going to benefit in the short term, but maybe a couple hundred are going to benefit in the longer term. And they're going to benefit, like, walking to school and, like, running with their siblings and doing things that they wouldn't have been able to do with a drug that wasn't made for their condition. And so those are the kinds of things that's just not going to, in our industry, a couple dozen kids, no one's going to take a cheap old drug, and work on a couple dozen. And it's not that they're not going to work on it. I take that back, because I should really emphasize that there's been amazing work done, because the condition's called Bachman-Bupp, and that's after two doctors, Dr. Bachman and Dr. Bupp.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.